Hi everyone, in this small tutorial I just wanted to show you how you can actually do a drawing with only 4 pencils, but this is a great one for tonal values. This is to get that understanding of the contrast in your mid-tones, your darks and your lights. And I thought this would be a great little one just to practice on. So you can take any reference image and just turn it into grayscale and then have a bit of a practice. And like I said, it's a great way of just understanding those different sort of tonal values that there are within a drawing and how to make sure you're getting your darks dark enough and your lights light enough. So in this one, I'm going to use the Cretacolor black for my black, but any black would do. I'm also going to use the Carbothello 100, the titanium white, and I'm going to use the 720 in the Carbothello, which is the cold grey 1, and the 726, which is the cold grey 4. But like I said, just choose, a couple of different mid-tones in your grey, slightly darker, slightly lighter, and your black and your white. All right, so first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to get this really bright highlight plotted in. So I'm just going to take that white. The last thing we want to ever be doing is popping the white over the black if we can avoid it. If we can get that white nice and light right from the get-go, it just keeps it lovely and vibrant. Otherwise you're always going to be sort of fighting against that, and that'll just muddy your colors. And then I'm going to come in, I think I'm going to use, initially anyway, I'm going to use the 726, the cold grey 4, and I'm just very lightly, I might lighten this up a little bit. Just going to pop in a bit of that just into that lighter highlight that we can see on that eye. And yeah, I think I will come in a little bit with the 720, the cold grey 1. And I'm just going to go over the top. Like so. And I'm just going to take my Q-tip, which is definitely one of my preferred methods for blending. And if you have sort of seen any of my tutorials, you'll know that I love using Q-tips. All right, so now I'm just going to come in with that black. I may need to sharpen this a little bit. I'll see how I go. And we just want to come in to that pupil with that black. Now you will find that especially if you're drawing eyes, the pupil is probably going to be predominantly your darkest tone. But it's always important, especially when you're doing any sort of pet portrait, etc., having a good look at the corners of the eyes, shadows being cast by the ears, all of that sort of things. You want to always be making sure that you're getting those darks nice and dark. Something I say all the time is don't be afraid of your darks. A lot of people, especially when they're starting out, sort of shy away a little bit from using using their blacks too much. On saying that, black isn't necessarily always black. You may have a bit of a color, maybe that might be an indigo or even some pinks and things like that. So always be aware there might be other colors within your blacks, but you still want to get them nice and dark, because otherwise it can just look a little bit sort of wishy-washy. right. So I'm going to come in now and around that eye, just for the time being. We'll work more on this, but I'm just going to come in with that 726. I just want to get my base layers sort of all sort of plotted in. So that's 726, that's the cold grey 4. I'm just going to come in and around that outside area of that pupil. Just be careful when you come around those darker areas. I'm just going to plot the whole lot in at the moment, and then we can work on adding those different tones and blending and softening that eye. Now I'm just using the light grey pastel matte paper for this one. It's just a little, it was just a little square I had left. I just thought that it's got that bluey sort of tone to it, I think would work nicer. Just doing it in this sort of monotone colour scheme. And then I'm just going to take a Q-tip and I'm just going to push that pigment down and into the paper. Again, just be careful with that black. We don't want to be pulling too much of that into that area if it doesn't belong. Now the reason I'm using the Cretacolor black for this one is that I've found just recently that that is probably a lovely dark black. What I do in a lot of my tutorials is I'll come in at the end with a black charcoal pencil, and they work fantastic for getting those sort of dark areas, those really dark areas, nice and black. So don't think you've got to rush out and get a Cretacolor black. A black charcoal, a nice dark black charcoal pencil will do just the same job. Alright, so I'm just going to come back in with that Cretacolor black. I'm just going to get this little corner in here done. Now, one thing I will say about the Cretacolor black is that I find it very, very hard to sharpen. I love the fact that I wouldn't necessarily come in with the Cretacolor black like I've done here straight away. I'd save it just for, like I said, getting it really dark at the end. And the only reason for that is, like I said, I find it, and I use a craft knife to sharpen, I find it extremely difficult to sharpen. It's very sort of soft and crumbly. And it's, yeah, I think for the, the price you pay for these pencils, and there might be an easier solution to sharpening than the craft knife, but craft knife is my preferred method of sharpening, so I really don't like to sort of deviate from that if I can help it. Now I've popped in this little section here of that black. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my Q-tip to actually start blending some of that black up and in to that lighter grey section. And again, I do this a lot, because I'm a firm believer that if you've got a bit of pigment on your, your blender, then use it in your actual drawing. Otherwise you're just throwing away that Q-tip, or not so much if you're using a paper stump, because you wouldn't throw that away. But you definitely want to be using that pigment if you are using a cotton bud, and not throwing it in the bin when you've got all of that potential to use it for your shading. So all I'm doing here is just looking at my reference image, and where I can see that it's just that little bit darker onto that grey, I'm just softening a little bit of that edge. Again, just little dabs, just where it's sort of coming out into the eye. We're nice and dark up the top here. I'm just going to use what's on my Q-tip to start with, just to darken down that top edge. And we'll come in and darken that one down a bit more as well. Same with just down the bottom here, it's a bit darker. Again, you can lift up a little bit of that pigment and then just apply that on. We've got a tiny little sort of line just coming up the center of that reflection. So again, we can just use our Q-tip, just dab on a little bit of that pigment there. Again, just always having a good look at your reference. Again, it's a little bit darker down the bottom. I'm just going to use a bit of that pigment down there. And then I'm going to come in with that lighter grey, that's 720, the cold grey one. I'm just going to lighten up now that lighter sections we can see. So it is lighter down the bottom here. Again, it's just sort of coming out from the eye. You can see that those lines are just working down. Much more prominent at the bottom of the eye, and then it does sort of get a little bit more out of focus as it comes round. This area here of the eye is quite dark. This is your lightest section here. And this is the important thing with tonal values. You always want to be looking at where your darkest section is on your drawing, and then have a look at where your lightest section is. And then you gauge sort of everything else off of that. It's a little bit lighter just up on this edge here of the eye. And then again, we can just come in with our blender, and we can always just give that a little soften. If there's any sort of graininess or pigment that you just want to press down into the paper. Alright, I'm going to come back in with that black, and I'm going to get this edge here again nice and dark. By getting this nice and dark, that's what's going to make this eye pop out. Might just add a little bit of that black, just coming down in here, very light pressure. I'm going to add that black at the top here. Again, don't need to be going too hard with that pressure. Excuse me. And the same down here. Just around the base of that eye. We just want to be careful here as well, because we do have just those little sort of dots coming just in between. So nice light pressure with that black. We don't want to be going too heavy-handed. We don't want it to be really dark. Again, we're focusing very much on where is the darkest areas. So the pupil is definitely the darkest, and then we're really dark in here as well. Everything else is so much lighter than that. Even that little bit up the top is so much lighter. So again, we can come in with that black, and we can pop in just a few of those little sort of lines that we can see coming up the edge of the eye there. A couple of little darker sections. Again, we can always use our Q-tip for that. So we can come in and push that pigment there, and then just where some of these darker little sections are, just give that a dab with that pigment that's already sitting actually on your Q-tip. You can just soften just in between some of these little lighter sections. We can just bring a little bit of that black just coming out. Again, just keeping that edge there nice and soft. Again, just in with that Q-tip, soften. Again, just darken down any areas that we think need to be a little bit darker. Alright, I'm going to come back in with that 726, that cold grey 4. And I'm just going to get that plotted in just on this section, just around the eye. Same underneath here. Up the top here as well, so we'll come all the way up. And I'm going to bring that also just in to that sort of little eyebrow, sort of eyelid, or maybe more eyelashes, I suppose we would call it. I'm also going to bring a bit of that just up and into here. You can see how this is a little bit darker. Just going to pop a bit of that in there as well. And down this side here, you can see it's just a bit darker. And then just a little bit just in and through. I don't want this to be too solid of that colour though. I want to sort of just Be very light with my pressure here. A little bit of that, just again, just coming down. You can see where that darker tone is sitting, just on that fur. Again, we'll just take a blender or a Q-tip, and a paper stump would work on this slightly larger area. Again, you're just pushing that pigment down. I've gone over that darker area slightly there, but I'll fix that up in a second. Again, just be conscious of your blending. You don't want to be pulling out that darker pigment if you don't need to be. Always be looking at your reference image. Just going to turn that over and just very gently just soften that black that we popped under the eye. And then just back into just sort of pushing that grey down into the paper. Might just come back in with that Creta black and just neaten up that little area there above the eye. And I want to just soften this little section here. I'm going to just blend that just slightly as it comes round, because as you can see, it's not completely dark all the way around. Again, we want to be very aware when we're doing our tonal values that we're getting those darks in the right place, and we're not putting them into areas that they don't belong. A tiny little bit actually on the eye, more so than the actual edge here. But on saying that, I'm going to take that pigment because I want to darken that down a little bit. Again, we can always pick up a little bit, and then we can sort of come in, just dabbing that over that grey. We'll just slightly change just that overall tone of that grey. Now, if we were using numerous pencils, this wouldn't be such an issue, because we would just come in maybe with a few different pencils just to achieve the colour and the tone that we're after. But for this little study, we've got to kind of get into the habit of just blending a few of these together to achieve what it is we're actually looking for. And the same up here. I don't really want to put the actual pencil yet, because that might just make it way too dark, especially with me using the Creta colour. So I'm very much going to just use the pigment off my Q-tip to darken down any sort of little sections just here above his eye. Same in here. This top little section needs to be a bit darker. Remember, we can always come in and just reapply some of that dark. Into that pupil if we need to. I'm just going to just ever so slightly pull a little bit of that Creta black just out there from that top section, and then just push that out with my blender. Again, we just want to be careful around this side of the eye because that is quite bright around here. So I'm going to come in with that 720 and I'm just going to tidy that edge up. Again, we want to be aware of where the lights are and where the darks are. I'm going to have to come in a little bit more, I think, with the 726. Just want to get that tone around the eye right. And then in the actual eye itself is where we just had that lighter section. I'm just going to reinforce that a little bit. And then back in with that 720, I'm just going to come in and I'm just going to fill in and around that darker grey that we popped in there. So this first layer, I'm still going in the direction of the fur, but I am going to come back in and over this with our white towards the end. Now another thing with your tonal values is you don't want to be putting in white too early if it doesn't belong. Now there will be some instances where you will need to, because some subjects will be really bright, and the last thing you want to be doing is, you know, trying to sort of put a darker color underneath, because you'll never ever get that white back to what it would be if you'd gone directly in with your white. So just always be mindful. Have a good look at your reference before you start. You know, have a little break, have a think about where those tones are sitting, what you need to do to achieve those. Again, all I'm doing here is just plotting in some of that lighter grey. I'm going to pull a few strands just through that darker area there. I don't want to hide the dark altogether, not in this section, because it is darker in that under layer of that fur. Same coming up and into here. Again, we just want to be adding some of these fur strokes. And just be mindful of that direction. Constantly looking at those tones. You know, you look at this corner here and it's nowhere near as dark as the pupil. So the last thing you would do is bring, you know, this area here as dark as that, and vice versa. If you put your pupil this level of color or this level of black, then it's going to look wishy-washy. You're not going to get that three-dimensional sort of look to your drawings. I'm just going to drag some of that 720. We're going to blend this a little bit, because this sort of side is a bit out of focus as well. So, but even when you're doing out of focus sort of areas of your drawing, you still need to be extremely mindful of, you know, the tone that you're trying to achieve. I'm just being very aware again of the direction. Pulling some of these hairs. You can always come in and darken these down. Pull just a few coming in. Now when you do, especially if you're doing, or any portrait really, but if you're working on this one, just always be mindful that when you do pull a lighter colour into black and vice versa, make sure you just wipe off the tip of your pencil, because you will pick up pigment, and the last thing you want to be doing is popping that back down onto your paper. I mean, you can imagine if you were doing something like maybe a zebra stripe or something like that, and you were doing the black stripe, the last thing you want to do is pull that black into your white area, because you're just going to muddy all of your colours. Now all I'm doing here, just with that Q-tip, and you can use your blender, is I'm just softening. I'm being very controlled about where I'm blending, and that's something that I do talk about more in my tutorials. You still need to be very aware when you're blending, where you're blending, how much pressure, what direction you're blending, because the last thing you want to be doing is muddying the areas round about. And we can see in this reference we've got a much darker area there. So I'm going to come in with my black, but I'm going to be very, very sort of light-handed with this. I don't want it to be a solid. But we've definitely got that darker shadow in there that is darker than the greys around it. Now again, if you've got a bit of that pigment, use it as we come up and around. And you may not have enough pigment on your blender, and if that's the case, then just again, you can just come in and just apply the tiniest little bit, and then just soften that with your Q-tip or your blender, until you get it at that tonal value that you're happy with. I think this one here needs to be a little bit darker. I'm just going to add a bit more pigment there. I'm going to come in and just lighten up this little section here again. I've come a little bit too close to the eye with that dark. Again, we want to just be very light pressure. You know, in hindsight, this Creta probably wasn't the best choice because, like I said, it is such a dark color. You know, the pigment of it is really rich. This is just the 720, just to sort of tone that little section there down a little bit. And I'm actually going to come in with the white here. So this is the titanium white, because I just want to get this edge here of that pupil just at the side here. Lovely and light. I'm just going to soften that. I don't want it to be a line. So I might just come in with a clean blender. You don't want to be pulling black out here. I'm just softening that edge. I want that eyeball to be lovely, you know, lovely and rounded. We want to be able to see that, and by using those tonal values is what will give us that. I'm going to add the tiniest little bit of that white just on this little bottom reflection, and even just a little. Now I am hardly touching the paper here. I am just glazing the pencil over the surface. You can hardly even sort of hear it. Just want to fix up this little reflection. Okay. I'm going to come back in with that 720, and I'm going to start just working on some of these lighter tones just around this section of the eye. So just again want to just be very careful. We've got these little hairs. And they're just sort of going in all different directions. Like I said, this is very much a tonal value little demonstration. For it still to look realistic, we definitely need, just to make sure that when we are popping in any of these little strokes of hair, that we are getting those correct. And in between those is darker. So I'm just going to come in with that 726. Again, just pull a few of those darker little marks. Darken down just a few of these ones. But again, these are not black. They're not that color. But as you come around here and underneath the eye, you can see on the reference image that it is darker. So again, you could always just use some black pigment that you've got on a Q-tip, which is what I'm doing here. And again, you can see that that section there is much darker than here. And this is why I like using the pigment that's on my blender, because you can add it gradually. The last thing you want to do is to be coming in and popping down, you know, a really dark sort of black, and then you're struggling to try and get that back again, if that makes sense. All right, so just under this eye here, we can see that lighter sort of tone. So back in with that 720, but it's a very sort of broken little line here. It's like the little watermark that you get on eyes. And just another little tip for you as well that you'll find when you are drawing any sort of reflection, especially in eyes, there's always an opposite reflection, and it's just got to do with that curvature in the eye. So we've got this reflection here, down here you can see you've got that sort of little white watermark there, and then you've got the big reflection there, and if you can see on this side of the eye at the bottom here, you've got that lighter mark. So always keep an eye open for that when you are drawing your eyes, because it does, by adding that in and not sort of forgetting about it and missing it out, makes a huge difference to the realism that you're going to achieve in that eye. Now this is too light, this reflection, way too light. So all I'm going to do there is, again, I'm going to pick up a little bit of that black, and I'm just going to very gently just start tapping that black over. I don't want to take it into that white, really bright section, but I do definitely need to tone this one right down. Again, we can always come back in and darken the pupil. And another thing, if you didn't want to lift it off your drawing, which, you know, I know a lot of people don't, especially if you've worked sort of really hard to get any sort of shape and everything to it, just pop a little bit of your pastel onto just a piece of just printer paper, even is enough, just to give you that little bit of pigment, and then you can just pick it up with your blender and then you can add it to other areas. Now all I'm doing here is I'm softening up this edge. It was way too harsh. So again, I'm just coming in with that pigment and softening it up. Now I may need to actually come in with that black and just define that shape again. So we do have a bit of a separation in that reflection. Just up here's a little bit darker. This just comes in a little bit of a triangular shape. Again, I want to make sure that it's where it meets that eyeball, that's nice and dark there, because that's what, having that depth, that tonal value, is what's going to make this eye look like it's rounded when in fact it's just a flat piece of paper. And that's the importance of tonal values. That's what's going to change your drawing from being quite a flat image on the page to popping. And you'll just notice such a big difference in your realism. Again, I've got a bit of that pigment, so I'm just going to pull. I might have gone a little bit too heavy-handed there, but we can fix that up. Just going to get a clean blender. Yeah, I think I've gone a little bit too dark there, so I'll need to lighten that a little bit. Again, that's easy done. You just come in, I'll come in with that 720. I'm just going to pull a few of those strokes. Again, they're quite out of focus, so we'll soften these up a little bit. Again, you're just looking at that reference, seeing where the direction of those hair strokes are traveling. Alright, I'm going to come back over this side again. I got a little bit distracted there. I'm just going to pop in just a few more of these these little hairs. I'm just going to pull a few just out as it's coming up the edge of the eye here. Just little dabs. Like I said, I wouldn't want to be coming in here with the white. And again, the reason for that is, what is your lightest tone on this little drawing? It's the reflection in the eye, followed by this little side here is quite bright, and also here and down this corner. They are the brightest sections on this drawing. So again, you wouldn't be wanting to come in and make these little sort of marks as bright. Just going to lighten up just a tiny little bit on that eye. And then I can see the very edge is just a bit darker. I'm putting very little pressure here because it is not a really thick, it's not a solid black line. It's just sort of an extension from that darker section above the eye. Again, I'm just gonna, might just use the 726. Again, I've just come out a little bit with that black, which I don't want. And then back in with that lighter one, that 720. And then you can just add a little bit of that. I'm going to come back in with a 726. I'm just going to start just popping in a few of those strokes again, just to add a little bit of contrast to the colours coming through. I may need to pull a little bit of the black again. Just coming out from that little section there. Again, don't be afraid of your darks. Get that dark so that it makes that eyeball pop. But this little section here needs to be brighter. We're kind of losing the eye here, if you can see that. So come in with that 720 or your lighter grey that you have. And just, again, just add a bit of that lighter colour. This probably doesn't need to be as dark. Again, just aware of the little pattern that's in that eye as well. Again, just a little, you're hardly sort of touching the surface of the paper. But I'm going to come back in with the darker grey, the 726. I'm just having a look at the reference. Again, just going to pull just a few hairs. Again, we're being very mindful of direction. We don't want to be putting darker hairs down where they don't belong. And again, everything is just light pressure. We don't need to be pressing hard. Come out here a little bit more. Just pulling a few darker little ones just out from the eye. Again, you can see where those darker sort of sections are. So again, this is again your tonal values. So this section down here is very similar to this section here. So you wouldn't be wanting to make this bottom here way darker than here. You want to be keeping them very, very similar. Very lightly, just bringing a few just in down at the bottom here. I'm just going to come back in with that 720 if I feel I need to, just to, like I said, just lift. I've got to watch the shape as well. Like here, it's very much coming up and sort of out from that edge of the eye. So always be aware of that as well when you're trying to get that realism. Because we can see this bottom section here of the fur is coming up and over. So we want to make sure that the fur behind that is going in that right direction. While I've got that lighter pencil, I'm just going to add, I might have to go lighter than this. I'm still conscious of this area down below, and it is a bit lighter. But again, we don't want to be going as light as that little watermark that we did. So we're just going to be very, very careful on the pressure that we use. And the colors we use. Now obviously in this one we restricted ourselves on purpose to just using a few pencils. I'm just coming back in with that black here because I really need to darken down this little side of the eye. It almost just completely disappears sort of into this section here. So that's where we're going to be very aware of pulling a little bit of that black up and into that eye. Again, just a little blend. Another little trick is bring some of that lighter down. So I'm just coming in with the 726, and you can just pop a little bit of that just under there. Again, it just sort of gives that little illusion, like I said, that eye is just sort of coming in and into that really dark section. And I might even come back in with that black and just right on that little point, get that nice and dark. I'm going to have to just pull a few, like I said, a few darks. Just in and through that top. So a little eyebrow. Again, I've just got these these darker little hairs. I think this little section here needs to be a little bit darker. I might just come in with a little bit of the black. Now, like I said, if you're using, and this was just, you know, you doing just a normal portrait, if you had different shades of your grey or the different colours, then obviously you're not going to come in and put black here. This is just, I think, practicing with some grey toned drawings is like I said, it's an excellent way just to help with those, identifying those tonal values without getting caught up in colour. Because sometimes when we do add colour into things, it can distract from what we're, you know, you get more focused on the colour than you do on the, you know, on the actual tonal value of something. I'm just pulling a few of these darker little lines in. A couple of little darker little marks just down in the corner of the eye. Again, this little edge here needs to be darkened down a little bit. So I'm just going to bring in that black. And again, just darkening down this little edge here a little bit. Just going to pull a few of those hairs just out. Just want to soften here just a little bit. It's just a little bit sort of stop start. I'm just going to tone down as well just some of this darker areas I've brought out. Again, you're looking at the tones. You don't want these little lines that are coming out to be anywhere near as dark. You might have little, you know, little dots in the eye. Then by all means pop those in so they're a little bit darker. Again, just losing that shape there just a tiny bit. Tiny little bit that lighter pigment from that 720. Again, just always have a step back, always have a little bit of a break. You want to be coming back at your drawing with fresh eyes. It can be, it can be a little bit sort of, you tend to sort of glaze over what it is you're doing because you think to yourself, I've been staring at this drawing potentially for a few hours. And you miss things. It's amazing how you'll go away, have a cup of tea or a coffee, and then you'll come back and go, why did I not see that? So it's really important, even just for a few seconds, just roll your chair back a little bit. Have a comparison between your drawing and your reference image. And you can sort of see where things need to be sort of tweaked and little adjustments made. I'm just going to soften some of these lines. I don't want them to be too... I'm just going to come in between them just with a bit of that lighter grey again. And if you do need to make things a bit lighter, just add a little bit more pressure. You don't necessarily need to go with a lighter colour. Sometimes just coming in with a little bit harder pressure is enough just to get you that tone that you're looking for. Again, I'm just going to add a few more of those lighter ones. Pull a few of those ones that I said are just sort of sitting above. Again, I'm just seeing where things are a little bit brighter. I'm just going to take my needle with a razor. I'm just going to tidy up this edge a little bit. I don't often work this way with a box. What I do is I'll bring my masking tape right up to my image, because I must confess I am a little bit of a messy artist, and I do tend to, I don't stick to the lines. I was never very good at colouring books when I was young, because I did tend to sort of cross over the lines. So I tend, if I've got my masking tape right up, it just, yeah, hides a multitude of sins, and you can just remove the masking tape, and then you've got this beautiful sort of pristine edge to your drawing. All right. I'm just going to come in here with that 720 and just pull a few of those lights. Now remember, if you do bring your lights into a dark, I usually just have a little microfiber cloth, and I will just wipe the tip of my pencil on that cloth. And that just saves you dragging any of that pigment up and in, you know, to a lighter area, or vice versa, a darker area. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're getting any of these lighter areas. I'm just adjusting the the shape of that eye slightly. I'm going to just pull just a couple of lighter ones just in here. Not too much though, because this is your darkest area. But if you look at the reference photo, apart from that little dark area there, the tonal value of this area here is very similar to here. So you wouldn't want this to be really dark up the top here, because it wouldn't match what's happening down here. But this little section here, you want that nice and dark. So it does come with a little bit of practice, tonal values, unless you're one of those really sort of lucky people that can just sort of see it in a drawing or a reference photo straight away. I've come a little bit too low there with that light. Again, I'm just gonna just make sure that I've got the shape of that eye right. Again, we just want to make sure that we're not making these little marks in the eye too dark. A little bit darker just in here. And then we've just got these little row of dots just underneath. A little bit of that black. Soften that slightly as it comes around the eye there. And let's just lift a little bit of that pigment. I still think just this little section here could be a tiny bit darker. And then don't forget, if you have been lifting any of that pigment, make sure that you're coming back in and really darkening that down. Okay, so just some final touches, I think, for this little tutorial. Just softening some of those. I need to pull, I think, a few more lighter hairs just coming in and through. Just need to break some of this up a little bit. Just needs to come in a little bit lighter there, just at this edge. Again, just any little sort of tweaks that we think we need to make. That could even probably be a little bit darker, just those little lines. Again, just blend those out just a little bit. Again, a little bit more pressure if you want that to be lighter without going into that white. A little bit just down the center perhaps. A couple of little dabs just underneath there. Just going to come in with that 726. Just want to make sure that I'm getting these little hairs coming out. I think I'll need to add a little bit of black, just a glaze. Alright, I'm going to come in with the white now, just right at the end. I'm just going to add just a few strokes. Now I'm being very careful here not to go overboard. I just want to lighten it a little bit. Same down here. Just adding just a few little hairs in that corner just to lift it a little bit. I want to soften this edge. It's looking a little bit harsh. I might come in with that 720. I just want to soften right up against the eye there. It's just a little bit too bright. I'm just going to come in, I'm just going to just blend ever so slightly. Again, I want to make sure we're not losing that shape in that eye. So I might need just a tiny little bit of that black, and then that needs to be toned down with that 726. Again, just trying to get that shape right inside that. And that's the great thing with pastels as well, is that you've got that, you know, that fantastic ability to put some light over dark, and just pulling a little bit of that black out. Again, just to soften that side of the eye a little bit. Bring Bring that little shadow round a little bit more. And then just right in here, I can see it's a bit lighter. See, just here. But again, we're not going as light as our lightest. Maybe a tiny little glaze, and I mean just hardly touching the paper. Just adding a little bit more pigment just to brighten up this little section here. I'm just going to come in with my black. The shape of this little reflection isn't quite right, and I'm not going to stress too much about that, because like I said, this is more of a tonal value study. I'll add just a couple other little dots just into that eye. Then you can always just add a little bit of the black just to separate them a little bit. And again, while I've got that black, I just want to make sure that just around that edge, nice and dark. I think this top edge here needs to just be a little bit darker. Again, I'm going to use my Q-tip for that. And I'm just going to pull out a bit of that darker pigment just into that section there of the eye, just as it's coming out, because it is a lot darker just at the top sort of part of that eye. Again, just making sure that that white reflection is popping. I'm going to add a little bit of that white, just a couple of little dots down in that corner of that eye. And like I said, maybe just a couple of little dots of that just underneath there. Again, it's very easy sometimes to pop things into your drawings that you can't see. You know, don't put things that aren't there. And we do get carried away sometimes, and we can sort of add, you know, when we get caught up in our own thoughts while we're drawing, we can add things that, yeah, they do not belong. So sometimes less is more. I think I'm quite happy with that. Again, just need to soften. Like I said, this side is a little bit out of focus. Again, this is all about our tonal values that we're working on here. But I am quite happy with that. I'm just going to make sure Again, that I'm just getting that edge of that eye coming round. Another little tip is you don't always have to either lighten something up or darken something down. Be aware of what's next to the area you're working on. You know, if you just slightly brighten up a section in your drawing, that'll work just as well to darken the area next to it as if you'd come in it, you know, had come in and darkened it down yourself. So just always be, you know, mindful of that as well. But overall, I'm reasonably happy with that one. So I hope that that's sort of just helped you a little bit with your tonal values. And I encourage you to, you know, find a reference that you like, turn it grayscale and practice, because you will identify your tonal values a lot more using this sort of method than sort of being distracted by all the colour. And then when you do come to do your coloured drawings, the tonal values will make a lot more sense to you. I'm just going to come in one last little blast of that black on those darkest sections. And like I said, do not be afraid of your darks. They are what is going to make your artwork pop and go from just that flat image to something that is going to just pop off the page. So I hope you've enjoyed that one. I'd love for you to share any of your drawings over on our free Facebook community, and I will see you in the next tutorial.